This is the Neurosurgery Podcast. Welcome back to the Neurosurgery Podcast, and Happy New Year, everybody. We made it. Dr. Wang, good evening, welcome, and Happy New Year to you and the family.
Yeah, great to see you, JP. 2026 is going to be amazing.
Of course, it always is every year. And, we've been seeing a lot of each other lately. We've done a few episodes in the past week. We had a lot to celebrate, some big news that we had to comment on as it was happening in real time. And then we recently passed 1 million listens across all of our platforms. And so that gave us a great opportunity to kind of catch up, look back on everything we've talked about on the show so far, and of course, give a big thank you to the audience. So today, since we just had that opportunity to look back over this year, today we're going to do what we do every year and look forward for the year to come. But this year, instead of the typical resolutions that we always do, somewhat tongue-in-cheek each year, I think, you had a great new idea that instead of saying what we're going to do in our lives and at work next year, you want to play Nostradamus and predict what's going to happen outside of our own lives, in the field and in the world. So here we go with Dr. Mike Wang's 10 predictions for 2026. Hit it.
If I even get 7 correct, I'm going to be really amazing. But
well, I mean, Major League Baseball, if you're batting 300, you're a superstar. So
That's right. That's right. Well, these predictions aren't just my own ideas. Obviously, they come from reading a lot and going to national meetings, speaking to our listeners out there, other neurosurgeons, people in the policy world. So there are 10 of them. I'm going to go through them pretty quick. And JP, I'd love to hear if you think this is a legit prediction. Okay. Now, some of these aren't even really predictions. They're like talking about what's happening now. And the first one is more payer denials. We saw 2025 herald all kinds of new denials for surgeons out there. They know getting into rehab became impossible. Nobody could have any surgery without doing physical therapy in the last 6 months or 3 months. And I think this is going to launch the AI war. A lot of surgeons have said, when to use AI to get the denial overturned or get the approval, but we know the insurance companies are already using AI to screen, right? So I think this is going to launch a true AI war, and I don't know who's going to, well, let's just say that we are less well armed for this.
Yeah, of course, because we're kind of like we were talking about recently with Brian Gantwerker, we tend to be fractured and we're all very individualistic and out in our silos, whereas the insurance companies are big. So they have numbers, they have the force, they have the dollars. And kind of to your point, introducing these predictions, this is something that we're already sort of seeing. There have been news stories about insurance companies using AI to review and deny claims faster than any human could have done it. There's already regulations and laws being discussed. And I think you may have seen the news story last year where someone called a customer service and there was an AI answering and they had an AI talk for them. And then the two AIs decided to just speak in computer code. And it sounded like in the 90s when you picked up the phone and somebody was on dial up. I don't remember the name for that language they were using, but
they were using Sanskrit.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah. Right. But I think this is, to the extent that it's already happening, it is inevitable that this is only going to get worse, if worse is what you want to call it. There's a new tool available. Everyone's going to use it. And what really pisses me off about this is the same thing that pisses me off when we see physicians online talking about using AI as scribes in the clinic or to help them with the clunky EMR, EHR, or getting their coding queries answered. It's slapping a Band-Aid on a broken leg. The proper thing to do is to fix the system, not just come up with some new workaround to help you function in the broken system. But of course, humans being what we are and the way things always go, we're not going to fix the system. We're going to use the shiny new tool to just work with the problems that we've created for ourselves. So I think you're right on the money with this one, that this AI war, as it applies to insurance and payer denials, it's only going to get worse next year.
Right. So second prediction has to do with the government as well. And this comes from conversations with my other surgical colleagues, not neurosurgeons, and they've told me they've witnessed a lot of changes. Now, this is not political. I mean, the current administration has definitely bucked the trends of kind of keeping status quo. And these surgeons were complaining that, a lot of their vascular surgeons, by the way, a lot of their patients are poor. And because of immigration policy, patients aren't coming to the clinics. A lot of their patients probably were like illegal, or they were on the TPS status or whatnot. And this, as well as a lot of the CMS changes happening in the congressional breakdown and all that, again, not taking sides is going to have a huge impact because doctors are slow to respond. We get used to like, okay, I do it like this for like 4 or 5 years, and then these changes are happening very fast. And if you look at, let's say, a shrinkage in the population of the U.S., for example, that's going to have some impact. So a lot of these seem to be. I'm sorry, so many of the predictions are, of course, negative, right? But this is, I think, going to be quite important if you work in a county hospital setting, right? For example, or safety net.
Yeah, I mean, the issue of immigration and its the increased restrictions we've seen on it, the deportations we've seen in the past few months by this administration, again, not passing judgment one way or another or commenting on it qualitatively, but simply observing what has actually happened. This is an issue that touches several facets of medical practice and the medical business, right? Because you talk about reducing the population so there's fewer patients. Sure, some people are out of the country, so you've lost those patients. Some people, to your point, may be afraid to come to the clinic because they're worried about what their legal status is. And some people who are legal and have their papers in order and everything are still afraid to come in. Some people whose status is more questionable, maybe, are going to stay home and lose their care. Um, on the other side of things, you hear some people talking about how that will lower costs because these people are consuming healthcare services and goods on the government's dime. And if they're removed from the system, people argue that may lower costs for the citizenry as a whole. And then the third facet where immigration touches our industry is, of course, importing doctors. We have this ongoing doctor shortage that everyone talks about. And in many, especially rural areas and places that are less desirable to live, people frequently make the argument that American doctors don't want to go live and work there, or we don't have enough doctors to send there. And so, importing doctors who are trained from overseas, another form of immigration that's being curtailed by this administration, is their proposed solution to meet the need for doctors. And we talked a bit about that earlier this year with Scott Becker when we gave he gave his 5 trends to watch in 2025, and immigration and the physician shortage and importing physicians as a means to counter that shortage was a point he talked about at great length.
Yeah, it's very interesting because a quarter of all the GME spots are taken up by FMGs. And you can argue the virtue of that. Like, shouldn't we just train our own doctors? There's a lot of, we're not taking sides on this. These are just predictions of trends. And I remember at the county hospital in LA, the last administration that probably had some unity was the Clinton administration.
Yeah.
I mean, how old were you then? Were you in middle school or?
I was middle school or earlier, frankly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was an administration that had a lot of like both sides of the aisle. And Bill Clinton, actually, the famous haircut story when he's on the tarmac at LAX, he flies in to bail out the LA County Hospital because it was understood these are illegals. They are not getting health care, but the LA County system is the safety net. The federal government gives them $5 billion. Take care of these people. We don't care if you're legal or not. I mean, it's a proposed solution. Again, taking sides on this is not what we're doing, but this is going to revisit that. So prediction number 3 is also about the government, and we touched on this with Brian Gantworker a couple weeks ago. And this is about the Medicare Wiser project, the capital W, capital I, capital S, lowercase e, capital R, Wiser project. And the pilot, again, in 6 states, I think it's like Texas, Oregon, Alabama, Washington. It's a bunch of states. And I'm sorry if I get them wrong, but there's 6 of them. And they're launching tomorrow on January 1st that 17 procedures, like many of them neurosurgical, are no longer going to be done without prior auth with AI. And so
Yeah.
if you're in one of those 6 states, like get ready because Medicare was not Medicare Advantage, straight Medicare was open. You can just take care of the patient, right? At a reduced rate, of course. But this is going to have a gigantic impact on people in those 6 states and then the rollout in subsequent years.
Yeah, and I mean, once again, as we just discussed, the advent of AI, it's inevitable that this is going to creep in and start rearing its, in my opinion, ugly head in so many facets of the healthcare industry, private and public. So, just for the listeners, the Wiser program, it's Washington State, Arizona, New Jersey, Oklahoma, Ohio, Texas. It stands for the Wasteful and Inappropriate Service Reduction Model. And to your point, Dr. Wang, like we discussed when we had Brian Gantworker on, a lot of those procedures are things that neurosurgeons or associated specialists do, injections, nerve stimulators, even DBS is implicated there. And so what's a little insulting is that they picked these procedures because they argue there's less evidence for their efficacy. And in some cases, you can see the point they're trying to make. Relative to other medical interventions, there may be less evidence, which doesn't mean that the evidence we have is poor. It's just, some of these things are newer or they're done in fewer people, so they don't have as much robust, numerous long term evidence as, say, a statin, which the evidence for that is looking more shaky these days. But to your point, this is going to have a huge impact on neurosurgeons practicing in those states, and the implications echoing out to neurosurgeons nationwide. One, for the question of these procedures being funded, and two, the seeing how it goes when the federal government starts using an AI to review our prior auth, just like we just talked about for the private insurance companies.
Yeah, hats off. Call out to former guests like Lou Toomey Allen, John Ratliff, Joe Chang, Anthony DeGiorgio, and of course Charlotte Pineda and Katie Rico representing us in DC. I suspect there's a lot of lobbying efforts, and please think about the Neurosurgery PAC, the Washington Committee, as you think about maybe supporting efforts if we get desperate with this. So,
Yeah, I will say
yeah,
the PAC, the Washington Committee, the CSNS, these individuals you name, everyone. It's cliche to say if you aren't sitting at the table, you're on the menu, and it would be foolhardy to think that every neurosurgeon can show up and be at the table. These are the people sitting at the table for you. Donate to the PAC, contribute however you can to these committees, and at the very least, in Texas, shake these people's hands and say thank you.
exactly. Next up, this is a big one. ACCME new rules came out in 2025. The impact is just now being felt, which, and I don't know where this came from. There must have been some cardiologist that did something really bad. But if you, but if you have any ownership in any kind of an interested party, and this you can look at the law on this or the rule, I should say, the rules. Then you can no longer speak in any CME setting, and there's no de minimis amount. So in other words, if you have 5 cents of stock in a company doing a trial, and it's not part of a mutual fund, it's not publicly traded, somehow you can't talk anymore. You've been silenced. Now, I'm reminded of Ed Benzel's old comment, if you're not conflicted, I'm not interested. And we all understand conflict of interest now. There is no question there are conflicts of interest. The biggest conflict being that we're paid to operate on people, right? But this is really changing things because I've seen meetings now full of speakers, and not to disrespect them, but they're not people I know. I've been to many meetings now where the speaking is terrible. But this is going to have a big impact because some of the societies are talking about pulling out of ACCME and saying we'll do CME, but not through the ACCME. And so this is going to have some impact, and you'll see meetings partition out into CME and non-CME components more clearly.
Right. I mean, I think what you're seeing here is the approach to the tipping point, right? Like so many of these trends, people talk about slippery slopes. It has been a slippery slope. This increased vigilance and regulation of physicians and what you do in practice, what you do outside of your clinical practice, and when you can say these words versus those words. We have been going down the slippery slope of this restriction and regulation of physician activity, that we're getting towards the bottom of the slope where there's a big cliff. And what happens when we fall off that cliff is exactly what you're talking about, that eventually physicians who have been pushed and pushed and pushed are just going to say, fine, no more. I'm going to take my ball and go home, and I'm not going to play with you anymore. Because to your point, Dr. Wang, on the one hand, let's say you're just an honest physician and you want to make a good living and take care of your family and your kids and get compensated. Our reimbursements have been going down for years or failing to go up along with inflation. So if you want to do honest, genuine work with a company to make income on the side, why should that preclude you from speaking in an academic setting if you're doing so responsibly and unbiasedly? And on the other hand, let's say if you're a patient and physicians are going to take care of you with surgical devices or medications, don't you want the top minds in academic medicine or in a given field contributing to the companies that make these devices or these drugs in a way that is safe, efficacious, easy to use by surgeons, easy to administer and dose by pharmacists and doctors? So this enforced divorce between physicians and academic practice and industry is just foolhardy. It's going to have a negative effect on the lives of physicians, And ultimately, it will have a negative influence on the quality of products that these companies make for our patients.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, next up, number five, and this comes from residents I've spoken to. I've finally heard for the first time residents starting to complain there's too many neurosurgery residents. And now most programs, and including ours, they all take a matter of pride on how big they are now. They're like, we want 4 a year, we want 5 a year, we want 3 a year. And we used to, as Dr. Giannotta said on one of our early podcasts, there was a fine filter. It's like you have 1 or 2 residents a year, and the quality had to be ensured. And very few people were let go because it was 7 year of commitment. And now we're seeing programs. Miami's now 4 year, and some even going to 5. And like it's becoming like general surgery. Now, do we need that many neurosurgeons? I'm finally hearing senior residents say, "Wow, there's too many people. It's getting harder to find a job." And I think this is a real tipping point here. We're finally seeing it, and the academicians that are program directors, they all want bigger cadres of trainees.
Yeah, I mean, I get in these conversations a lot with DeGiorgio or a buddy talking about number of cases per trainee and how that reflects the real life of practice. And what it comes down to is there's only so much neurosurgical pathology in the world, and there's plenty of car accidents and traumas and back pain, but the number of GBMs per year is what it is. And so, if you want to have a robust and broad as well as deep training program, the more residents you have, the fewer of those rare and numerically restricted pathologies there will be per person. Now, I think complements are going up uh, partially in response to work hour restrictions, because if you rely on a resident workforce to run your service and contribute in the hospital, if those residents can work fewer hours per day, per week, per month, per year, you need more people, unless you're just going to replace them with physician extenders, mid levels, that kind of thing. But ultimately, if your goal is to produce a competent, well rounded neurosurgeon, as you say, there does come a tipping point where however many cases one person gets during residency, what are those cases? How are they spread out across the minimums? And when they get out into practice, what will be there for them? Have we sliced the pie too thin to support a full time, fully employed, fully utilized neurosurgeon in the community? And maybe the answer is what it means to be a neurosurgeon will just change and will become more like other physicians in the American system. That would make me sad to see. And I think a lot of people who still have a sense of romance and tradition about what it means to be a neurosurgeon, but that may be the direction that things are going.
Right. Now, number 6 is pure red meat. We're halfway through. And this is competition with adjacent specialties. Now, we've always had this like ENT with skull base, radiation oncology with stereotactic radiosurgery. But this has reached a whole new level because we're seeing pain doctors bill surgical codes. We're seeing real competition in neuroendovascular, where I heard that it's hard to get a job now in neuroendovascular because hospitals would rather hire a radiologist or a neurologist because they're cheaper. These are really important elements of what's happening in our field, and I'm hearing a lot of complaining about it. I've never seen so much agitation as in a meeting when this topic comes up.
Yeah, and I'll remind you that when we had this New Year's conversation last year, when I asked you for resolutions for 2025, one of the things you talked about was hearing those kinds of conversations and people telling you, I'm worried that the future of endovascular is not neurosurgery. It worries me greatly because, again, I have always been told since I was a medical student with you and then during my training that the people who go into endovascular, wow, what a steal they are for the hospital because they can cover stroke call, they can do all these electives and diagnostics, which are a great churn and burn way to make money for a hospital ethically and honestly. They're quick, safe procedures, and then you can also cover neurosurgery call and trauma call. And I think to your point, hospitals are wising up and realizing, well, they can get the churn and burn and the diagnostics and the elective angios without having to worry. Well, who cares? We don't need neurosurgery call coverage. We don't need trauma call coverage, depending on the size of the hospital. And at the same time, you're seeing a proliferation of places that are becoming or trying to become some degree of stroke center, or being able to offer thrombectomies, even if they're not a comprehensive center, and they transfer people down the road to where the comprehensive center is with neurosurgery. I think that the sheer emphasis on volume is driving people away from hiring neurosurgery for these jobs, and I hope we can find a way to correct that course. As you say, this is the red meat. So if this keeps going this direction for 2026, what can neurosurgery do to combat it?
Yeah, that's a big, big problem, right, for us. So this is interrelated with that. So the next one, number seven, is that I think we truly have reached that tipping point. 80% of new grads are taking employment positions. I haven't heard anybody going into private practice this year. This transition from being an independent practitioner to a employed physician is truly going to have a major shockwave. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I understand it's about survival. Even private practitioners out there are starting to say, I just want to work for a hospital now. But this has an immense impact on our relationship to patients and relationships to payers, and in terms of what we're sort of incentivized to do and not do.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it. I think it's bad. Speaking as the young, possibly naive person, I'm not even in practice yet, but I think it's bad, and it breaks my heart that realistically I don't even have the option of going into private practice. Because you talk about people preferring to just be hospital employed and going into hospital employment or academic employment. There are very few private practices left that someone could even join, or if someone wanted to start one, who's your competition? Sprawling nationwide hospital conglomerates, private equity owned practices that have relationships with hospitals. I think this is a terrible trend because the mentality of someone who is self employed versus the mentality of someone who is uh, you know employed by a hospital is totally different. To your point about making decisions for patient care, hiring and firing for your personnel, the people on your team having hiring and firing power, the ability to offer charitable care for a patient if you want to, all of these things, the ability to control each aspect of our patient's experience and their care course, it's not impossible to exert influence and to have that kind of power in an employed setting. Obviously, you do. You have an incredibly successful practice. You're happy. I've seen it. You have a lot of decisional power and control over your team and how things are done. But just first principles, what are the odds that you'll have more or less autonomy and control over your environment and your practice if you work for yourself or if you answer to someone? So this is and we've talked offline about kind of my depression about this trend, and even for people that want to go into academia or want to go into employment, it's a better medical environment and it's a better country when there is a robust population of private practice people out there too, kind of keeping things balanced and each ecosystem keeping the other honest, right?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Now, the first seven were a little bit negative potentially, but the last three are potentially very positive. Okay. So, number eight is the growth of new fields. So, neurosurgery has always been great at taking on new arenas as technology arrives, as pathologies get worked out. And for example, like in the world of functional and spine, right? This is something we're trying to start where spine surgeons take care of people. And I think even Elon Musk has said that's the next vista, is an implant for the spine to control not the brain but the spine and below motor sensory pain control and things like endovascular functional. And along those lines, just to throw a teaser, we have to have Adam Arthur back on. Adam, who is the chair at Sims Murphy, thinks that one of the biggest new openings is going to be in headaches. And so headaches have traditionally been something we don't really want to talk about, but new implants that will allow us to control the headache symptomatology as neurosurgeons, implantables. And so there are a lot of potentially like green pasture, blue ocean type opportunities for neurosurgeons to grow the field. And maybe we will need all these trainees, right?
Wow, I mean, headache, that's like the low back pain of the cranial world, right? And I wonder, maybe I'll put the question to you, because the idea of spine functional neurosurgery is kind of a beautiful nexus of all the hats that you wear and all the communities that you're a part of. Uh, Chronic pain, spinal trauma, spine surgery, the technology side with the implants and the modulation. So, if you had to guess, or maybe you could frame it as a guess or a prediction, but also it would be sort of a guiding light for young people who are interested in developing this field. I think, to my mind, the two biggest arenas for spine functional surgery are going to be chronic pain and then paralysis from spinal cord injury and things like that. Which one do you think we're better poised to make grounds advancing in this next year in the near term?
It's very interesting. I think there's so much money behind the endovascular functional. Like there's so much energy behind it and enthusiasm. I would tell you that I think um, there's a lot of chatter there. And you think about the power of all the neuroendovascular folks and all the functional technology that's coming to pass. That seems almost impossible to stop. But I don't know if it'll be in the next year. I really don't. What do
Yeah,
you think?
well, I mean, you think about it from the patient perspective, like we and in the functional realm, we saw people as soon as focus ultrasound was available, patients who either couldn't stand to undergo even a minor surgery relatively, or just were terrified and would never allow anyone to touch them with a scalpel, much less a drill, were willing to undergo focus ultrasound because it was incisionless surgery. It wasn't really an invasive surgery, so probably I think you'd see an explosion in patients who became candidates either through their general health or through their willingness to have some of these devices implanted or whatever kind of interventions could be done endovascularly because it's a puncture instead of a cut, right?
Mhm.
But thinking about these technological advances, then how about prediction number nine?
Yeah, prediction number 9. This is very exciting. I was at NAS in Denver, Colorado, and Victor Yang from Toronto, who is really a great innovator. Victor is one of the inventors, the principal inventor of 7D, right? I don't know if anybody's seen 7D. I have no interest in it financially, but 7D was a sort of next generation AI surface modeling mapping technology for navigation. Victor now has a new company called 8i, which is the first robot with two appendages. And these third generation surgical robots are really, really fascinating. If you hear Victor talk about robots, he's not talking about guides for screw placement. He was talking about if you were to do a remote surgery on Mars, the time at the speed of light for the signal to go back and forth from the Earth to Mars is too long a delay
Yeah.
for a robot to be a slave. So the robot can no longer purely be a slave. It has to have an understanding of, okay, now go suture this up. And the robot would suture that up. And Victor is a genius. He's thinking about this. So I think these third and fourth generation robots are finally arriving. The 8i robot with the two arms has not been FDA cleared yet, uh, but it is fascinating. Now you have, and it's not just two arms. He has an arm with the power and an arm with the nuance. So like I don't want to say retractor arm and micro dissection arm, but you can think about it that way. This is really coming. It's arriving
Yeah,
like,
it's the spine arm and the aneurysm clipping arm, right?
yeah, yeah, or the laminectomy arm and the spinal cord tumor removal arm,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Well, what always interests me, and I think every time I get in a conversation about AI for clinical medicine or robots for surgical medicine, is are we going to be replaced? And I personally, you tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think that, at least in my lifespan, I'll lose a job to a machine. I hope not. It doesn't seem like things are moving that quickly. But the other thing that always comes up is liability, and that if you have a robot, especially like you're describing, that makes some degree of independent decision and independent movement. Um, if something goes wrong, who's to blame, right? And is that going to fall on the company that makes the robot, or who wrote the code, or is everything going to ultimately be under the auspices and responsibility of the surgeon? And so much like with the driverless cars, we're entering into uncharted terrain that the courts are going to have to work out. And so I hope that just as we have geniuses building these new arms for us, we also have geniuses in the courts and in the halls of our legal leadership to protect us from, undue blame. Obviously, if a surgeon or any kind of doctor does something wrong, they should face the consequences for that. But hopefully, as these new technologies roll out and things advance in that way, we could be protected from undue or unjust blame if something goes wrong.
Well, we're seeing absolutely massive awards against Uber, against Tesla, right?
Yeah.
And you're seeing that happen, and it's just a nameless, faceless corporation. I have a suspicion, though, that this is not going to defray risk to us. Something tells me that we're too disorganized, that the companies that make these robots are still going to somehow pin us for all the liability. But again, I don't want, I'm going to be optimistic, which takes us to our last prediction. And this is in line with what Brian Gantworker talked about and Sandra Conley, who's been leading this sort of discussion, right, at the INS level as president about collective bargaining. And I've always been against it, but I really feel like the first conversations are going to happen in terms of exploring. Like, we've lost so much ground as doctors, and I know nobody's going to be like feeling sorry for us as neurosurgeons yet, but it's like a lot of things. Collapses happen very slowly, then all of a sudden, right? And I think you're seeing that in the lack of morale, and it bothers me because neurosurgeons we're the last. We're sort of the apex predator, so we're the canary in the coal mine, but we're the last to fall in other ways because we're so resilient. And I think that maybe we lead the charge in this way, and it would probably be better coming from us than from pediatrics, for example.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of promise here. And as you said, we've had some conversations about this on the show recently and offline. And I think this may be a way forward to address a few of the trends that we've just discussed in your previous predictions. Um, what worries me selfishly is that, as you said, these things happen so gradually. These are slow processes. And so if you were to view some of these predictions or some of these trends negatively, as I've said, I think a number of the things we've talked about are bad. The odds of correcting them within one generation very low. And so all the work that we're going to do to try and fix this system, it's like turning an elephant around. It's going to take a long time, and I think that anyone involved in this process, much like people who do basic research and who know that they're going to contribute to a cure for a disease and they won't be able to treat their patients today with it, but patients in 100 years may benefit. Anyone who signs up to work on these social issues, legal issues, financial, economic, policy issues, you should know that is this going to make things better for us today or for the bulk of, think about myself, my own practice, my own career? Probably not. But you got to be a happy warrior, right? And if you show up and you're unhappy about the environment that you're coming into at the start of your career, you have to think, well, what would I have wanted the people to do 50 years ago so that I wasn't in the situation I'm in now? Okay, I'm going to do that today and think about the next me coming out of training in 50, even 100 years, and try to leave things better than you found them, and push things more toward the picture in your mind of how you wish the practice of medicine could be for us all.
Yeah, young listeners, pay attention. JP is saying something very important. I'm old enough, I'm 54, that it may not matter at all to me. But for the young people listening who aspire to be neurosurgeons or in training now, this is a really critical time. I know everybody's preoccupied with their own problems, but you signed on to be in the greatest specialty in medicine. You got to preserve it. Think, what would Harvey Cushing do? What would Walter Dandy do? We're
Right, and
this.
yeah, frankly, it's just at its heart, it's the case for optimism, right?
Right.
Our previous guest and friend of mine, Dutch Rojas, we had him on the show a few months ago. He had me on his own podcast, and he was kind of interviewing me and trying to poke holes in my optimism and asking me why I believe that we can make these changes and stuff. And frankly, what I said to him, and the case I would make to any young people listening today, you're signing up to be a doctor. Medicine is a game where at the end of we always lose. Everyone dies eventually, but we still show up every day and work very hard to delay that from happening, to stop people from dying today, even if they're going to eventually. So I think anyone who signs up to be a doctor of any kind, especially neurosurgeons, we take care of brain cancer and severe head trauma and paralysis, chronic pain and deformity. Anyone who signs up to do this job has to have some little kernel of optimism in them where they know, well, it may take 50 years, but I'm still going to try. Or I may not see the fruits of my own labor, I'm still going to try. Because we're all doing a job where at the end of the process, we're going to lose, but we still play the game today while we can play it.
Well said, JP.
Yeah,
Well, I'm
before
looking forward. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
was going
Sorry.
to say, before we wrap up, this has been such a forward-thinking episode. We're not doing the resolutions, but I would like to take a moment and wave goodbye to 2025. And if you could, maybe not just for the show because we talked about that, but whether in your personal life or at work on the job, if you could just give a reflection on uh, a deep experience or something you learned this past year that you're going to carry with you as we go forward to 2026 and start meeting some of these predictions face to face.
Well, my resolution from 2025 was to spend more time rounding and talking and trying to educate our young people. And I think I got about 25% of the way there. Shout out to some of our amazing interns like Andrew Wang and Dash Chuan, who really have done a bang up job and took care of everybody in the first 6 months. I try to teach them in a very, you know, in a very old fashioned and not effective way, but they absorbed lessons. And I'm very proud of them. I'm going to try to do even better, maybe another 25% in 2026 better.
That's fantastic. An old fashioned and ineffective method.
That's right.
I love it. Well, Dr. Wang, we've got you on the record now for 10 predictions, and like I said, if you bat 300, you're in the MLB. So I look forward to ringing in the new year tonight. We're going to publish this immediately, so all of our audience can get a New Year's message before the ball drops in Times Square, as it were. Thank you, as always, to everyone listening who have stuck by us for another year. We already talked about passing 1 million listens and how grateful we are for you sticking with us and some of the new directions we might take the show this coming year. But of course, Dr. Wang, always a heartfelt thanks to you, both for the show and everything else you've done and continue to do for me. Happy New Year to you, Amy, the kids. Let's see what comes in 2026.
Yeah, and thank you for inspiring so many young people, JP. I think people can look at you and say, wow, you're a shining example of how you should be at that age, which is to be inspiring other people. You've been teaching and teaching. Thousands of people listen and they're learning. They can agree, disagree, but their brain's working, and you're delivering these messages to them. And thank you to our listeners for the feedback. We love the feedback, even if it's negative. We love to hear from you. And I hope everybody's safe and prosperous and healthy in the new year.
Amen. And shout out to everyone on call tonight, of course. Happy New Year.